Hello, my name is Konstantin, and you are about to start an adventure into a brain-computer interface world and design fiction world, and a world where people say what they actually think of mandatory brain-computer interface usage in law enforcement. That's in a nutshell my master thesis. And I'm about to now voice over my whole master thesis presentation, which I did originally in Finnish language. And since my channel is English and I want you to be able to understand what I say, this is going to be the voiceover of that whole recording. We are going to go through multiple topics. So stay tuned, go grab a coffee or a nice Taiwanese oolong tea like I have here in my table, and stay with me here. So the topics that we are going to go over is what is brain-computer interface and how they work. Namely, brain-computer interface is BCI. So I'm going to talk about BCI a lot here. Why police officer might be the first to adopt BCI. How to study a technology that doesn't exist with the design fiction. What is a design fiction? How it differs from sci-fi, and how it's really, and is it really a legitimate academic method? What is a good master thesis made of? What kind of structure it has? How I embedded and hid from my research participants the academical theories into my design fiction product, and why I did that. How I used AI, how I used AI as a visual designer who quite likely has a neurodiversity to help me with my struggle with a lot of text. And so my research results also is going to be published in this video. And they are that we have to have an off button, we have to have individual calibration, we need to remember to stay organic humans, and we have to have access to the data which is being read from our brain. This one is exciting. What a cybercrime unit officer with 20 years of experience in policing is really thinking about mandatory BCI adaptation. And finally, my design fiction product, the story of police officer who is forced to use BCI, and how this story provoked, and how well my design fiction product worked and provoked my participants to discuss. So let's begin. My name is Konstantin Nikkari. I have started at the University of Lapland in 2007 and have been studying there essentially ever since, until this thesis. So whether it is a neurodiversity or ADHD, the thesis felt like such an insurmountable challenge that I simply didn't do at that time. Then various jobs came along. I've been an entrepreneur for 11 years in different roles: video, photography, graphic design, acting, and design. The good news here is, and I think very strongly in visual terms with colors, images, and shapes. Producing texts has been incredibly difficult for me. What came to my rescue is that we now have text production tools in this world, meaning AI. We'll talk about that a bit more later. The eternal studies end now, unless I continue with doctoral degree. About the thesis. This is a thesis presentation, not just a topic presentation. It is a finished work which I have submitted to University of Lapland on 24th February 2026. I am interested in how we relate to brain-computer interfaces, how we perceive them. I will explain in just a moment what a brain-computer interface is. In English, and I have written this in thesis in English, down here is a RQ. Well, RQ stands for research question. How do different stakeholders receive the concept of brain-computer interface deployment in law enforcement, and what identity-related concerns do they anticipate? And there, in the bottom right, is the thesis cover. The Augmented Police Officer, a design fiction study of perceptions of brain-computer interface used in law enforcement. Let's talk about brain-computer interfaces. I use two terms interchangeably, brain-computer interfaces or BCI, which stands for brain-computer interfaces. I'll probably use BCI more often. The purpose of a BCI is to bypass our voice, speech, and gestures as input methods. A BCI is attached to the head, either externally, on the surface, or the technology is placed inside. It reads our brain waves, electrical brain signals, takes that signal and sends it to another computer. With a BCI, you can control drones, robots, wheelchairs, and in the future possibly also communicate. An interesting fact about thought communication. Academic research hints that soon it may be possible to communicate through thoughts alone, when two people are both wearing a BCI. This slide is the same one I have showed to my participants who took part in my research. The point of this slide is, when the technology feels like science fiction, this slide says, actually it isn't. Everything in this slide is today's technology. Each of us could actually access this technology right now. On the left, last year, Synchron became the first in the world to open a native connection to Apple products. They now have a partnership. Synchron's BCI technology works by pushing a small tube through the jugular vein into the brain. It goes in from here and stays inside the skull, inside the head. And then they pull the tube out, and the mesh stays behind, and that mesh reads the brain's electrical activity. BCI comes in two types, invasive and non-invasive. Also in the invasive category there is a less invasive option, which is the Synchron's approach. In the middle, for example, are options like neuroable, noise-cancelling headphones that also read brainwaves. Those are completely non-invasive because they just sit on your head. Their job is a bit like an aura ring. They tell you, for instance, when your brain is overheating. On the right side, there is a person flying drones over an audience and controlling it with his thoughts through BCI. In the top right corner is an image with a blue background. That's an excerpt from the Office of the Police Chief Scientific Advisors in the UK, the OPCSA. They commissioned a report on emerging science and technology trends likely to impact policing. Their report identifies neurotechnology among trends likely to impact policing within the next 10 years. And then there is also a news story. In 2018, news came out of China that they were using BCIs in a way that if workers were too tired, the BCI would detect it and they would be sent home to rest. They called that technology NeuroCap. In my research, I had an accessibility gap. I am studying how we perceive police using brain-computer interfaces. The problem is that no police officer currently uses BCIs. So I do not have the option of putting a BCI on an officer's head and then studying how we perceive it. And my solution to this was design fiction. Or actually it was a solution that my supervisor Ashley suggested to me. When he suggested it, it felt really strange, like, what is this design? Sci-fi thing? I don't want to make a movie. It didn't feel academic at all, but then it actually turned out quite well. I believe that the police, along with the military, will be among the first to adopt BCIs. Institutional compliance mechanisms for mandatory technology already exists. Body cameras, databases, communication systems. When a technology comes along that enhances time-critical decisions and high-stake encounters, these institutions have the structure to mandate adoption in a way that civilian populations would resist. And BCIs provide that possibility. A word about design fiction. The main purpose of design fiction is to provoke, to get us talking and thinking. It needs to be provocative. It uses storytelling, it should be entertaining, and it should be believable. Here is an example. Superflux made this few years ago. They turned a real small apartment into what it might look like in the year 2050. In that future, the climate has warmed so much that farmers have failed to produce enough food for the people. And people have started growing food in their own homes. Mushrooms, all kind of protein. There is a book in the scene that reads "Pets as a protein source." A bit of a sad thing. But it immediately brings emotions to the surface. And that is above all the purpose of design fiction, to provoke. And that's how it's different from sci-fi products. Take the film Blade Runner, for example. Its primary purpose is to entertain, then provoke. Design fiction first provokes, and then also possibly entertains. And it's a nice thing that it entertains, because then it's interesting to follow. Here's my thesis structure. I thought I'd present it. It might help those of you who are currently working on your own thesis. My thesis structure works like this. There is a cover that grabs attention. The title tells the key points. Then the abstract expands on that cover title. Then comes the introduction. What is being researched and why? What is being researched, why, how, where, and what is the structure? Then the literature review essentially lays the foundation for everything. Where do things stand? We position ourselves. What has been done so far, and where am I now so that I can move forward with this research? The methodology comes next. And the fourth chapter is our showcase as designers. We design something and use it as a research tool for our study. Chapter 5 is, in my view, the sum or output of chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. It is a completely raw data. It simply reports which results you got from your research. It doesn't evaluate them yet. The discussion is the more reflective part of the thesis. There you can think about why chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 produced 5, why it works and why it doesn't. The final conclusion chapter is like a reflection of your abstract. In abstract, you promised something, and in conclusion, you are going to say, this is what I promised, this is what it is, and this is what I recommend. References are the evidence of the work that we drew upon. We used other people's work. And the appendix is the evidence of our own work. What was done in the thesis? This question was recommended to be used in a presentation like this. My process was, first I understood what brain-computer interfaces are. Then I designed the design fiction product, the story of police officer Kaino Tuisku, based on academic theories. I'll tell you more about these theories later. Then I interviewed people, conducted research, and analyzed the results. My supervisor Ashley gave me the really good idea of doing a focus group and online survey and also a one-on-one interview. That way I demonstrated that I can do scientific research because each of those methods is slightly different. We had both quantitative and qualitative components. The focus group and the police interview were qualitative. And the online survey used mixed methods, Likert scales for quantitative data, plus open-ended text responses that produced some of the richest qualitative insights. And in the end, I hoped I would get results that could improve the world just a little, and tell something about these methods and this technology. Then the most important nerdy question: is design fiction a sufficiently academic method when it feels like you're just making a sci-fi product? On its own, it is not. But if you tie the design fiction product to academic theories, then it becomes academically valid, which in my view is completely acceptable for academic work. I've listed here the theories that I used in the design fiction story. I embedded and hid them within the narrative. I didn't show or tell my participants that, for example, at this point there is a Clark and Chalmers extended mind theory, which says that if we use a tool so seamlessly that we do not longer think about it, it becomes part of our mind. Or, for example, Ienka and Adorno proposed very interesting future cognitive rights, including that each of us has a right to our own psychological continuity, which sounds strange, but it means I have the right to continue being tomorrow the kind of person that I want to be or that I am. And this becomes relevant here because if I had a BCI that both reads and writes to my brain, and if it writes without my consent, then my psychological continuity changes, and that right is violated. I didn't tell my participants about these theories, but they were embedded in the story. And this way, the design fiction became an academically valid product. Because essentially, all the participants' reactions to the design fiction, all their thoughts and everything they shared and what I documented in the results related back to these theories. So in a way, my thesis validates these theories. Participants were never told about the theoretical framework. yet their responses consistently mapped onto them. This is documented in my cross-method synthesis. It suggests that theories capture genuine concerns, not just abstract academic constructs. Let's go over the last slides, the research results, before I show you the design fiction product. The focus group was essentially cautious throughout, and an Orwellian feeling emerged, like, wait, could this really read my thoughts? What is inside my head now? Could this product really read my thoughts? How does that work? From the focus group, when they realized that BCI also has benefits, that it clearly helps policing, they felt it was cautiously okay for it to read the brain, but absolutely not to write to it. This was quite significant novel finding in my study, which I named to the read-write threshold. People accept BCIs that read the brain activity but reject ones that write to cognition. As far as I know, this threshold wasn't in any prior literature. The focus group also felt BCIs would be extremely addictive. And they came up with interesting design recommendations. There must be an off button. It must always be individually calibrated for each brain, because we all have different brain waves. And in fact, our brain wave patterns are so detailed that they are comparable to our fingerprints when it comes to identification. In the future, I believe that when people carry such a device, it could be used to identify a person. Then a very important point from the focus group: people should also remember to keep working as organic police officers. The focus group's task was to empathize with the role of a police. And so they said that as a police officer, you should also practice working without the BCI to maintain your critical thinking skills. And that the whole thing should always be voluntary. You should have the freedom to choose whether to use the device or not. The police interview results brought somewhat different themes. The officer said that in reality, voluntariness isn't such a given. The National Police Board decides what devices police officers use, and then they must use them. When the focus group complained about mandatory BCI usage, saying, surely you can complain, or resign, or go to a union, the police officer who I interviewed was someone with 20 years of experience, currently working in the cybercrime unit at the National Bureau of Investigation, said it's not that simple, because officers come through such a specific training pipeline that there isn't really a choice. The forcing is, in principle, done in such terms. Here is a quote from the officer. Sure, dissenting voices come, but they get silenced. Usually it helps that you talk about new things a bit, people get used to them, and then they are accepted. The officer also shared inside knowledge about how a pilot for such a device would work. He thought the Special Intervention Unit Karhu, which is an intervention unit for both regular and emergency conditions, would probably adopt it first, and then it would roll out to other officers if the trial succeeded. We also discussed empathy. Some officers have very strong empathy, others don't. Perhaps such a device, one that can both read and write, could remind an officer to bring more emotions into their work, which would level out the overall quality of service to citizens. The online survey then provided numbers. Since it was quantitative, though not a huge sample, 43 people responded. I used prolific, meaning I paid for it, about £100 to get people to respond, which was great. That was also Ashley's tip, and I'd actually recommend it to everyone. If you can spend 100 or a couple hundred, you get your response in a day. No need to hang around online begging people to respond or emailing every student at the university. It was wonderful. Plus, the responses came incredibly fast. It felt like there is a huge pool of people on Prolific just waiting to answer because they get paid. Which is also somewhat problematic from an academic research perspective. In a principle, the best academic research is when participants are randomly selected, voluntarily participating, and the person doesn't know exactly what's being studied or how it's being studied. It's somewhat problematic that these people are paid and they try to produce responses worth the payment, so they get their money once they have completed the form. I addressed this in the thesis limitations. Prolific samples likely skew toward technological literate, English-speaking Europeans who self-select into research. No randomization was applied within the eligible population. The key numbers: 74.5% rated mandatory adoption as unacceptable. 86% predicted BCI would be more addictive than smartphones and AI. 60.5% said they would feel less safe encountering a BCI-equipped officer than a regular one, and 86% said they would not personally use BCI technology within the coming decade. Three things that were great findings. The thesis task was to see whether design fiction could be used to study a technology that doesn't exist yet. And this succeeded excellently. Then, our thoughts are the last fortress where we still have privacy. Nobody can get in there yet. But soon, because this technology can read, and some articles even mention it could alter and erase memories, people are extremely wary. And you could see it in the responses. Benefits of BCIs are recognized, but their value on the scale is unclear. Loss of privacy, submission to total control, orwellian thoughts that have come from sci-fi literature and people's existing stories. Plus, for example, the awareness of what's happening in the east and west of Europe. Here I go over a few quotes. The police, for example, praised the design fiction story, saying that it was well built and the way I presented it with my actor's skill was very impressive. And then about the head is the final fortress, the focus group said that this reminds me of a thought crime which was in Orwell's book 1984. One focus group member said that when they read about Kaino Tuisku in the design fiction story, they commented that it feels like the police officer become more like an NPC, a non-playable character from video games, one that just operates efficiently but the whole personality is gone. About AI usage while doing my research. It was both good and bad. It helped me enormously. It helped with the blank page fear when it felt like I couldn't move forward at all. I'd ask it to write a paragraph for me. Then I'd start reading and editing it. That way I get momentum, which helped immensely. But at the end of the day, I carry the responsibility here. I am still the sole author. The AI's name is not on the thesis. The thesis carries my name, my supervisors, and the universities. Everything the AI produces must be verified. It assists, it doesn't author. Relating to this, our normal thought process when producing texts is idea, draft, raw text, polished text, and finalization. That's the general normal process. In my personal neurological case, I think images instead of texts. That's why text producing was so difficult. The danger is that when text is produced for us, it looks like a nice finished result. But then you don't understand how to get to that result. I learned that quite often you have to go backwards through the normal thought process. When you get AI-produced texts, you need to think about what the rough version looked like, what the draft was, or what the core idea really is. Through this path, I found that sometimes the AI was completely wrong, and sometimes it brought insights I wouldn't have thought of at all. When I adopted these insights into my own work, it created a kind of forced learning, which was fascinating to notice. One tip, by the way, about the AI. I had the interviews. The focus group was about 1 hour, and the police interview was about 2 hours. Then I transcribed them to text. Doing that with the help of AI was a wonderful thing. The interviews were in Finnish, which is a difficult language for machine to transcribe. But I found a program which was designed for my language, and it converted the whole thing to text. Then I checked it was roughly correct and listened to the recording for the final verification. I got the whole thing done in a couple of days, which would have probably taken a week of manually listening and typing. I currently have about 30 pages of transcribed texts. Am I using the right term, transcribed texts? Yes, I think so. Having the interviews in text form is super fast when you remember that somebody said something specific about, but you can't remember where it was. You feed it to the AI and say, someone said something like this, where is it? And it finds it in seconds. Using AI with large text datasets is wonderful. It makes the work incredibly fast. It also removes the block I used to have. A massive amount of white space covered in letters used to be a completely insurmountable wall. Now that I can delegate the process to someone, it helps me move forward. It doesn't remove the academic substance of the research. Here is my design fiction product. The last slides. I read the first episode for you. I read just this one, and then we will go through the rest. Kaino Tuisku, 42, patrol officer in Finland. 2 decades of experience. Younger colleague Nikita has learned to feel safe in Kaino's patrol. Tuisku senses problems before they happen. It's a skill that cannot be taught. It comes from somewhere deep, from the body, Nikita says. At home waits Venni. 15 years together, 2 children, a mortgage. They go running together, compete over who gets the better heart rate. Technology has always been part of Kaino's work and free time. Radios, smart devices, cameras and databases. But to him they are just tools, not mist in the sauna. At the police station, a department meeting announces a brain-computer interface pilot starting in a month. They say it will improve risk management. In the evening, Venni wraps her arms around Kaino. What do you think about the brain-computer? Does it really read thoughts? Kaino sighs. Not like we have many options, we are not being asked if we want to carry a weapon. Venni presses her lips to Kaino's neck and taps her fingers lightly on his head, whispers in an inviting tone. Kaino lets out a laugh of relief for the first time that day. Here the entire atmosphere of the story is established. All my resources are articles or websites, except this one, which is a book. It's Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's the structure behind essentially most, not all, but most Hollywood films. There's a hero living in an ordinary world. Something happens to them. Their whole world turns upside down. They go on an adventure, terrible things, terrible difficult comes, real darkness. In the end, they overcome it all and return home. They are no longer the same person, though. They have changed because of everything that they have experienced. That's the hero's journey in brief. I use this structure when creating these episodes. These small boxes next to the text weren't shown to the participants in the story. As I said, they were hidden, but when I present the results, they are shown here, for you. Here it's established that Kaino has a family in this episode. 2 children and mortgage. That's probably a very ordinary life situation. It's easy to say Kaino doesn't have to accept the BCI. He can just resign and go somewhere else. The reality is that people don't have that much choice. People adapt, and the story is about Kaino's adaptation. Here, for example, is the third element, cognitive liberty. That's one of Ienka and Adorno's 4 proposed new psychological rights. The idea that each of us should have the right to decide whether we use a BCI or not. This story started in a way that I can show you another slide. So the story started from an earlier slide. It hooks using narrative elements, and the hook was taken by the participants. They said, Kaino's life cannot be real. This cannot happen for real. The focus group said that Kaino should have a choice. You can't force somebody like that. And the online survey said the same thing. The police officers' insights were more cynical. Unfortunately, police work makes law enforcers a bit cynical. So he said, yeah, that sounds about right. Based on my experience, things probably would go like that out there. In these episodes, I've hidden... Again, those small boxes weren't shown to the interviews. In this episode, I've hidden how the BCI becomes part of the mind. It works so well that you can no longer tell which thoughts came from where, from you or from the machine. This also touches a privacy violation, because the BCI produces a thought with which we kind of flirts with Nikita, and then kind of wonders whether that was his own thought or not. Then the darker time comes. Remember when I mentioned the hero's darkest hours? Things start to go downhill. Here we also have Derga and Gerlich's theory about how these are actually very recent theories from last year. How AI erodes our focus, makes us dependent on it, and our critical thinking declines, and our creativity suffers. I've woven this theory in my own story as well. From this, people picked up on exactly that. They felt kind of was becoming dependent on the BCI device. There was also an interesting theory here, exoskeletons. Exoskeletons are also augmentation, but they involve the human body. A person puts on a device that assists movements. When you move your arm, the device shares power with the movement and makes it stronger. That's the purpose of exoskeleton. Researchers studied people who used exoskeletons. They noticed that users experienced, they felt they were becoming more machine-like. If we make ourselves, for some reason, as efficient as machines, we shut down our emotional capacity and our sense of being human being. This came up nicely in the focus group, by the way. When they read this story, it felt like the whole sense of humanity was being stripped away. They said and communicated that the BCI is a threat to Kaino's humanity. Kaino has become a machine. They talked about how the brain computer changes a person and how we became cold. And that feels wrong. The second to last slide was about when I wrote that. Well, you remember when I wrote about Kaino, that Kaino flirts under the machine's influence to Nikita, and Kaino then wonders later what on earth he just said to her. And also, do you remember when I presented BCI that in 2018 news from China about them using neurocaps to monitor and read train driver's brain? If they're too tired, they are sent home. That's what I said. So in this part of the story, Kaino's supervisor came to talk to him and said his brainwave data showed that he was producing too much emotional data when paired with Nikita, when worked together with Nikita. So my focus group, the police officer, and everybody, in the survey, reacted to this very strongly. It produced the most strongest reaction. A complete violation, that's what they said. And that's what BCI is capable of. And that's how the strong discussion was emerged. And that's how a good design fiction product should work. Provoke strong discussion. This is the last slide. Kaino Tuisku has learned. That's what this slide is about. He's adapted. We had a really interesting discussion about the fact that all of us are judged by our actions in our society. But nobody knows what happens inside our head. It's an absolute whirlwind out there sometimes. There are all kind of incredible thoughts, and some of them are crazy and strange. Some are beautiful, but some are also awful, that you yourself are horrified at having thought about them. But they pass through a filter. And if we are healthy, if we are sane, we don't walk around the street shouting out everything we see and think. That's a healthy person, like having an inner filter. So that's the side of like a normal you, that we control what happens in our head. That's normal. So if we murder someone, we are convicted. But if we think about murder, we are not convicted. because nobody knows that we are thinking about it. It passes through a filter. We think, wait, murder, that's not a good thing. I should definitely not do that. That's a normal process of thinking. But now, when a technology is coming that can read our head, so at what point does that filter shift, or to what point? In the story I'm presenting, Kaino has adapted. He has to adapt. Because the whole thing ends with... let me read this very final paragraph of this final chapter for you. Outside the house, Nikita waits. Ready? Ready. Police patrol Kaino and Nikita drive into the beginning of workday. Kaino understands now. He has become a person who has learned to hide part of himself from the machine. It's not a victory, but survival and exploitation of the machine. Adaptation that restores his status among colleagues and was the only possible way to pay the mortgage, take care of the children, spouse and friends, and still someday make it to the retirement. So here, Kaino has learned to hide part of his thoughts from the machine. He has developed a kind of second internal filter, where some thoughts are okay to show, to bring closer to the surface of the brain, if we can say such. and then other thoughts must stay very deep inside, may stay hidden. One focus group participant said, that's exactly like Orwell's thought crime. And finally, my thank you for you for my voice. All right. So yes, thank you for staying with me. I hope you enjoyed. There was a lot of things, very interesting stuff. And I'm going to go now in my next videos. You know what? Let me promise that my next video is going to be the whole story of Kaino Tuisku, my whole design fiction product, so you will have that. So stay tuned and let's keep in touch. My name is Konstantin Nikkari.